baby boomers.
I used to be with it.
Millennials.
Okay, boomer.
Generation X.
What's going on?
And Gen Z. What do they have in common? Not a lot, it turns out. But one thing they can agree on is that this is the political podcast they want to listen to. Welcome to Not My Generation, the political podcast that looks at political events, news, and happenings across the world and at home through a generational lens. Your hosts are Dr. Emily Stacy and Professor James Davenport, two political scientists from Rose State College. But the views expressed on this program are solely the views of the host and their guests and do not reflect the views of Rose State College, its administration, faculty, or students. Coming up on today's program.
If you're eliminating the Department of Education, great, streamline that. But where is FAFSA? Where are Pell Grants going to get serviced? And how are students going to access that?
The courts are there to check the power of the other two branches. Go read Alexander Hamilton, Federalist number 78, where he says we have courts to protect us from an aggressive Congress or executive branch. And now, here are James and Emily. Good morning, Emily.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I am doing okay. It's been a while since it's just been you and I in the studio.
It has been.
The marvelous, wonderful Possibilities Inc. podcast studio that we are in. It's kind of a cold, chilly day still.
It's pretty rough.
And I hear there might be some more winter weather coming next week. So
allegedly, you never know about Oklahoma.
We will see. We will see. That's right. But I'm really kind of ready to be past winter myself.
Yeah, and I'm not usually that person. I hate summer. I'm a December baby, but this has been brutal this year. So yeah, I'm pretty done.
How's your classes going so far?
Classes are great. I have taken on a politics of law class at Oklahoma City University, and those kids are super sharp. We had a debate earlier this week. I split them into anti and pro reform of the Supreme Court and made sure to put two gentlemen who I know were very ensconced in their opinions on the opposite side so that they could get some of the other side. These kids want to go to law school. You need to know what the other side is thinking. So it was a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying this semester. Lots of dialogue, lots of literature based classes. The majority of mine, I've sort of switched to that model. So it's been a very fulfilling semester so far.
What was it that John Stuart Mill said? I think if you only know your side of the argument, you don't know very much of that. Is that right? Yeah? So
something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
I'll take it for today. Yes, paraphrasing.
Not a direct quote,
exactly.
By the way.
Yes. Don't clock us, Twitter people.
Well, it has been a whirlwind of activity for the last few weeks, right? President Trump assumed office on January 19th, I think is that the date. And it's been a nonstop daily activity that just keeps on rolling downhill. So we've got lots to talk about there. There's a feud that has emerged between Governor Stitt and School Superintendent Ryan Walters.
I don't know that it's emerged.
It has publicly emerged.
Right. I don't know, dude. This has been festering for a while.
But then just today or yesterday, Attorney General Drummond kind of weighed in that too. I don't know why he felt the need to do that, but
because he's running for office,
because he wants to be governor.
That's right.
And so he, whatever.
That's right.
So we've got a lot of there to talk about. The legislature is in action. There's lots of bills moving around. So no shortage of things to talk about. So where would you like to start?
I don't care. I have ironically, nothing that I have on my list was anything that you just said.
Oh, really? Well, what do you got?
This is hysterical.
Let's see what you've got.
I absolutely love that about us. So my number one bullet point was the Department of Education. Norman got a new mayor, which of course is local to me. So I'm pretty interested in that story. In fact, a tariff teaser. So definitely wanted to pick your brain a little bit about the tariffs going on and being dangled around. And then we're going to have a conversation in the coming weeks with the Mexican consulate here in Oklahoma City regarding some of those tariffs and how they will impact the state of Oklahoma specifically. And then I also have my last one, which, kind of shows you who I am, is Mitch McConnell being the lone sane Republican on these nomination confirmation votes in the Senate, which I don't know that I had on my bingo card. Trump says that he's voting against Trump, right, against the president, not necessarily his nominees, that McConnell is holding this, personal vendetta or grudge. And that's why he's voted them down. But I don't know, just interesting stuff all the way around. So yes, we have a smattering of things to discuss.
Well, let's lead off. Let's talk about the Department of Education. This is one of those things that is part of the slew of Trump activity and discussion. He has said at various times he wants to eliminate that department. He's issued, I think, maybe an executive order or two impacting it. There's all sorts of complications with that because that is an agency or a department that has been created by Congress, and therefore the president doesn't have the authority to just shut it down, so to speak.
But they can attrition it, right? They can absolutely whittle that down.
And this part of that will probably occur through his reduction in force activities, we might say, right? The federal government-wide memo of Trump saying, hey, get out of here, and here's 8 months pay or whatnot to not show up to work or something. And
so this has been a long time concern. Anybody listening who has been a former student of mine in the last 10 years knows that whenever I talk about specifically sort of federalism and, limiting the government and making it smaller, I'm all for that, right? Because as a taxpayer, theoretically, if the government is smaller, streamlined, I pay less in taxes, right? I'm okay with that, particularly the Department of Education, because theoretically, if it goes away, so do my $250,000 worth of student loans, right? So I am fine with this, right? I'm not flamingly liberal about this, but I've always cautioned my kids, my students, to think about where those services are going, right? That is my only concern. That's always been my concern, right? If you're eliminating the Department of Education, great, streamline that. But where is FAFSA? Where are Pell Grants going to get serviced? And how are students going to access that? And now we are at that point where we are, FAFSA applications are open for the fall. And so students are already kind of going down this path of, oh my goodness, is this going to be there whenever I get back in August?
This is not something that's new. Republicans have been talking about eliminating the Department of Ed at least since the Reagan administration. Ended up Reagan, that was not a fight he was willing to really mess around with. He had other priorities. And so, and then subsequent Republican administrations haven't really emphasized that as well. But I think you're right. When you're going to say, we're going to get rid of this agency, it is very helpful if you want public support of that to say, okay, and here's how these services are now going to be managed, or how we propose these services be managed, right? Would Pell Grants and student loans, would those fall under the Department of Health and Human Services? Would they fall under Commerce? Where are these going to go? Are these going to be pushed down to the states, and we're just going to send block grants to the states, and the states are going to now administer that? Don't know, right? But if people are concerned, I don't think because anybody is just beholden to any given government agency.
No, absolutely not.
But they're concerned about the
services
that are provided.
They've been promised and providing for the better part of 50 years.
And how are those going to be managed, right? And I think that's the question. Anybody who wants to reform has to think through, if you don't want to just throw people into a tizzy and get them really, really frightened, you've got to come out with a plan that says, here's what we're going to do. Here's how this kind of stuff is going to play out. And not just say, we're getting rid of it and we'll figure out the details later, right?
Yeah, there needs to be a whole flow chart, especially when it comes to something like this. It really is, it's concerning, I think. Forbes put out a really good sort of overview of the things that are up on the chopping block from the Department of Education, including limiting new federal direct student loans, which would absolutely impact, our targeted population, as certainly at an open admissions community college, sunsetting federal direct graduate plus loans. So these are graduate degrees. Borrowers who cannot cover the cost of graduate school may have to rely on private loans, which are generally more risky and carry a much higher interest rate.
Right.
This one may impact you and me in the future. Sunsetting federal Parent Plus loans, which of course, again, the same timeline. This is a like right now type of thing, but these are issued to parents of undergraduate students to pay for their children's college education, effectively. So it's the parent, not the student, who's the borrower and who benefits from a loan like that. So, these are just a couple of different things. They're also pretty much attacking federal student loan forgiveness, and so these are concerns, I think, not just for students matriculating currently, but also for those of us who hold loans and have interest-driven repayments and things like that. That could absolutely be up for grabs as well. So I implore folks to not just have their hair on fire and just immediately oppose these things, because, like we said, there could be some sense in reform and streamlining. Certainly there is bloat in the government. I am certainly not saying there's not, but we really do need to be careful about where those services that are being provided to citizens are going to go. And if they're just going to go away, how are we paying for school, especially at the state level? And I'll make my last point, and then I'll let you go on. I'll let you go on your rant, because I know I feel it coming. I just, kicking things back down to the states, fine. I want us to have an honest conversation now, while your legislature is in Oklahoma City, about them committing the funds to higher education and for these students who deserve to be in school to continue on, because that is a real concern in a state with a budget like ours, where we already are not devoting enough money to K through 12 education. So now we're going to put the onus of higher education squarely on the back of the state as well. I need people to really think this through.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of public policy experts, a lot of economists who specialize in higher education funding and such, there's I don't want to say it's a broad consensus, but there's a fairly well-established consensus in the literature that a lot of these programs that specifically loan programs have actually contributed to the high cost of higher education, because they've essentially increased demand without increasing supply, right? And so we need to have that discussion. Yeah. We also need to have a discussion of what higher ed should look like. But these are complicated discussions that you can't have in just one day, right, and say, "Oh, we've solved the problems."
With an executive order, yeah.
And I am really, really nervous. Now that, since you brought up that word, executive order, of this pattern that we've seen emerge. It's not just with Trump, although Trump has been super aggressive with this. Of the attempts by a presidential administration to govern via executive order. And I don't want to blame presidents per se. Any president is going to attempt to push the envelope on their scope of power, right? Yeah. But really, what this comes down to is an abdication by Congress of its responsibilities in these areas, and simply finding it easier to just let a president do some stuff, whether that's, trade agreements, whether that's other agreements, whether that's executive orders, and just let presidents kind of act like they can govern by dictate.
That's right.
And And that's not the way our system's supposed to work.
Well, I mean, that's not what J.D. Vance, constitutional scholar, says. Apparently, nobody has told these folks about Marbury versus Madison and that we have separation of powers and checks and I've been really gobsmacked this week, honestly.
I have been disturbed by these attacks, and I didn't like it when Biden did this. I don't like it that Trump and Vance are out here to look. The courts are there to check the power of the other two branches. When they veer off, that's what the courts are there. Go read Alexander Hamilton, Federalist number 78, where he says we have courts to protect us from an aggressive Congress or executive branch that want to exceed their authority. And so to act like a judge that says, I don't see where you have the authority to do this, is somehow, this liberal socialist, kind of anti-Trump. That's what they're there for. Right. And the Trump administration seems to act like, regardless of what the law says or the Constitution says, the president should be unrestrained in whatever they want to do.
I mean, the Supreme Court kind of gave them that.
Well,
an official act.
Almost.
Let me not be hyperbolic. Yes, right? Let me not be hyperbolic and start a fight.
They're protected from criminal prosecution. Right. That doesn't exempt them from having to follow the Constitution.
You're right. It doesn't. And let me not be hyperbolic. I don't mean to start a fight. I do think that he does have that air of let them check me on the back end. I'm going to do this. Right. And if they check me, then I'm going to say that they're illegitimate. Right. Yes. And post their daughter's addresses up and pick. I mean, this is really, I'm been really gobsmacked.
And here's the thing. And I visit with my students all the time about this. The executive power was the power that the framers of the Constitution were absolutely the most concerned about.
Yeah, very
it is the one that they were like, how are we going to do this? And if anybody remembers their American history, right, we had these things called the Articles of Confederation that had no executive at all. And they were like, okay, that doesn't work either, and so how do we craft this thing to keep it in its box, but to do the things we need an executive branch to do? But it's the branch. The fact is, the executive branch is the one branch in our system that is built to act quickly and acts most directly on the people. And that's why we should be concerned about it. Yeah, and that's why we want to have it restrained and not be able for a president to just come in and say, I'm going to do this and that, and I don't care what anybody else says. Right. And I'm worried that we are increasingly partisans on both sides. And we're experiencing right now with Trump partisans. And so we're going to be critical of those folks. Right. But partisans on both sides are increasingly enamored with executive power and the ability to do things unencumbered by Congress or the courts or whatever, right? And that really bothers me.
No, I totally agree. I agree. Although I will argue back just a little bit on that because I feel, again, very let down by Joe Biden and his lack of sort of manning up and using it more unilaterally because I still have student loans. I'm just saying. I think it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I'm there with you. I know.
The restraint it feels, again, I totally agree with you. I always say you're setting the precedent for the next president. I've said it on here many, many times. And so your worst nightmare, Kanye West or Bernie Sanders or whoever, is going to come in and they're going to be able to act by the same standards that you allowed this administration to. So you better pony up.
If you're not comfortable with the person you are least likely to want in the office of president exercising a certain power, you should probably be really hesitant about allowing the president you like to exercise that power.
You're not going to get it back.
You don't. And the ability of Congress to claw back stuff from a president has been almost non-existent. Yeah. And the few attempts that they've made, presidents have you look at the War Powers Act. Presidents just probably say, we think that's unconstitutional. We're not going to worry about it. Right. And other attempts to do that. And it's just really, really difficult. So yes, whether you listen, we've discussed this. We may think, yeah, the Department of Ed has been kind of a waste of time and money, but there's a process for going through that. And as we said, if you want people on your side on that, give them here's how we're going to do this so it is not disruptive to people's lives, so people understand what's going on, and communicate with all of the different actors that are going to be responsible. If you're saying we're going to push this down to the state, then we need to be saying states,
right now,
you need to be prepared.
Right now.
You need to develop your own capacity when we send these funds to you to facilitate these programs or whatnot, right? Instead, we just get, we're going to do this and nobody knows what that means at the end of the day, right? And that instability creates fear and concern and pushback.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And malicious overcompliance in other areas, right? Like DEI, or that's the obviously publicly funded schools and universities want to be in compliance. They don't want their federal funds to be cut, and so you have this. I'm going to just preemptively, before the courts rule, before anything happens, we're going to just dismantle everything. And DEI is just a good example of that. We can anything, but yeah,
you can whatever it is. This kind of let's you have a tendency of some folks to say, let's get ahead of the game, right? And try to not get ourselves caught up in something. And that creates its own disruption of sorts as well. We also have, you mentioned tariffs. Let's go there.
Mr. Economy.
This was really interesting. Trump comes out and says, we're going to slap Mexico and Canada with these tariffs.
And China.
And Mexico and Canada are like, well, we're just going to slap them back with ours. And then you have Trump saying, well, we've negotiated a 30-day reprieve because we think we're going to get some action. Canada agrees to do some stuff that they had already agreed to do, right? And so this was like they had already said, yeah, we're going to do this. And the Trump administration kind of tries to, oh, look what we did by it's like, and then Mexico does basically what they agreed, only to a lesser extent.
Exactly.
And so, it's like, this is confusing me, but here's the thing.
It's the art of the deal.
For folks who don't understand what tariffs are or how they work, do you mind if I just
please, James?
So a tariff is a tax placed on the importers of foreign-made goods and services, right? So when Trump says we're going to slap Mexico with a 25% tariff, Mexico's not paying that tariff. Domestic companies who are importing those goods that Americans have indicated they would like to be able to buy are now going to be paying that tax, right? So he is taxing American citizens for the benefit of being able to import goods and services that they would like to have, right? And so when you do this, the reason that countries across the world have kind of gotten away from tariffs is that they slow that international trade down, and they reduce the ability of countries to interact with one another, and for consumers, citizens, to acquire the things that they want at prices that they feel like are reasonable and they're willing to pay, right? And so I'm going to try not to be really, really partisan in this, but there are domestic interests that benefit when tariffs are raised, because that is a form of economic protection for them, right? And so if I make a certain good, let's say if I make steel and other countries have steel makers and we can import that steel at a lower cost than I can sell it, then I want a tariff to protect my business, right? And we might say, the initial response often is like, yes, we want to protect American businesses. But what that actually does is it harms the millions and millions more Americans who use that product in the construction of homes and buildings and cars and whatever, because it increases that cost. And that cost gets passed on to us as consumers. So our standards of living are lowered because we have to devote more to whatever it is we're trying to get, right? And so this is why most international economists are like, tariffs are not an effective way to do this. And they also stymie innovation and they stymie improvements in the domestic production of goods and services. We saw this, if people remember, back in the 70s and 80s, Japanese cars especially were just starting to come online and starting to be imported at larger numbers in the United States. Domestic manufacturers fought that. Carter, I think a little bit, and then Reagan certainly more, opened up the auto market to these foreign cars. And all of a sudden you see American cars having to compete with these others. And what did they have to do? They had to really improve what they were doing. They had to improve gas mileage. They had to improve safety. They had to improve all of these things because Americans were saying, you know what? I think this vehicle made in Japan is a little bit better than this one made in Detroit, and I'm gonna buy that one, right? So it forces companies to stay competitive. It forces them to consider improvements that they might not otherwise want. So tariffs, by and large, are a net negative on us, and they don't. And foreign countries don't pay them, right? It is domestic importers that do so, and so this is why they're problematic. There are a lot of people who say, well, Trump is just using this as a negotiating tool, but at some point, you're either your bluff is going to be called, and a country's going to say, do it. And either the administration will either back down or likely go ahead and implement it, which is going to have negative repercussions down the line. Right. And so, yes, this heavy-handed use of tariffs that aren't a good tool for accomplishing most of what you want to accomplish and harm American consumers. I've never been on board with this, don't like it, and think that it leads to all sorts of negative outcomes. So I think it's important people understand how these things work and why it is that they're not good policy tools.
So let me ask you a math question, because I hate math, PhD, but no math. So let's do a math problem. No. So if we have a car that is getting, say, windows that are manufactured in Canada. Okay, so it starts in Canada and then it has to cross back into America. And cross back into Mexico to finish being completely assembled, paint job, whatever, and then cross back into America. Is the tariff on that car 75% because it's crossed the border 3 times?
It could be, right? So if you let's say the window is made in Canada, it's imported into the United States, but then that vehicle or parts of it are, as you said, sent to Mexico. And then the finished product is re-imported to the United States. Yes, there could be a tariff on what came in from Mexico and a tariff on what came in from Canada. And now you're paying a much larger amount. So so let's say the window was $100 and we're going to slap a 25% on Canada. Sure. So now that the cost of that window is $125. Right. You're going to slap a 25% tax on the vehicle itself that's imported, the finished product from Mexico. So that's going to be even larger amount. You really are increasing the size of that vehicle and the component parts through these tariffs. And as I said, that means I have less money for bread. I have less money for shoes for my kids. I have less money to pay tuition for my children or whatever, or college student loans. So that's what we say when we say our standard of living is reduced, is because we're having to devote more resources to these other things that we otherwise wouldn't.
Right, because these companies are not going to eat that loss, correct?
No. I mean that's just not feasible for them, right? And there's always this back and forth about the split, right? So depending on the nature of the good, the company might be able to eat a portion of that and then pass on the rest to consumers, and what that balance is. But at the end of the day, we're all going to be eating that in some way, shape, or form, right? So
I'm really concerned. So we mentioned Mexico and Canada. Obviously, we've had enjoyed NAFTA or some version of it for the last 30 years. I am obviously increasingly concerned about China because it seems while the 30-day hiatus does apply to Mexico and Canada. It does not to Chinese goods, and they have slapped retaliatory tariffs on us. And I don't know if you've been to any of your stores lately, but about 80% of any store you walk into at this point is Taiwan or made in China.
Yeah.
A little concerning.
I think, again, the idea is, we're punishing China for this. Yeah. We're really punishing American consumers. It's like, I don't like what you're doing over there, so I'm going to slap my kid over here. And it's like, that doesn't seem to really solve the problem. And I'll be honest, when Canada and Mexico announced, well, we're going to slap these tariffs back on the United States, my first thought was, okay, so the United States is going to shoot itself in the foot, and your response is to shoot yourself in the foot too. Right. That's just, but so I think governments, people in positions of power, they have this tendency, they want to look strong, they want to look, and they don't think through, is this worth harming my citizens for this? I am sympathetic to some folks who are like, look, there are certain technologies that we need to protect in the sense of some kind of national security type of deal, right? Yeah. There's a reason we don't want all the chips made in the world coming from China. Right. There are other types of technologies. I don't like tariffs even in that, but I'm more sympathetic to that. But slapping tariffs on clothing and shoes and all this other stuff that's made from China, it's unproductive. It harms American consumers. And China will find other markets to sell those things in.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that's the danger, right? We live in a almost post-globalized society at this point, right? These countries are not going to just sit back and take it. Right. They're going to find other places to get their soybeans or get their aluminum or whatever it might be.
And listen, the integration of the world economy has been good for the United States. I don't know why people seem to think that has not been. Yes, I know some industries have suffered a little bit more as a result of it, but on the whole, the integration of the world economy has benefited the United States. And when we start doing this kind of so-called tough talk, and we're not going to take this from these countries that have been quote unquote taking advantage of us, just look, every analysis post-COVID has said the U.S. economy has grown more quickly and has recovered more quickly from that time than any other world economy. Yeah. And we've grown faster for quite a while now than most of our competitors. So we need to think, what are we trying to accomplish other than poking people in the eye? Yeah. And I'm not sympathetic. Listen, Xi Jinping is not my favorite guy. Right. I think he's a dictator. I don't think he's a friend of freedom and prosperity. Having said that, I don't think the answer is to punish ourselves. Right. To stick it to him.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I'm a little befuddled. We'll see what develops with the tariffs. And like I mentioned, we are going to speak with an official from the Mexican consulate here in Oklahoma City in the coming weeks. So stay tuned for that.
And that will be really interesting because I think a lot of people don't realize, there's a lot of trade that happens between Oklahoma and Mexico. And it would be really interesting to see the impact that might have. At some point, we might need to get some folks who are involved in some of those industries of trade on and talk about what the impact, if some of this comes to play like we think it might, what the impact will be on them as well.
Well, I mean, and we also have to think about the Canadian connection, Cushing, Oklahoma, right? The pipeline runs, I mean, so Oklahoma is uniquely positioned to be very disproportionately impacted.
We could be ground zero for the tariff, the tariff bomb, so to speak.
Very interesting. Yeah. You want to talk nominees real fast, or do you want? What do you want to move on to?
Whatever. It looks like the Senate is going to pretty much approve every Trump nominee. I was hopeful that there might be some pushback on a couple of these. Apparently, the Republicans in the Senate have just decided we're gonna give Trump everything he's asked for. Listen, I've heard some people make the argument that's what you should do because then there's no excuse when things go to hell in a handbasket.
I mean, we're getting there.
There's no excuse on well, they wouldn't give me who I wanted in these positions, right? I'm just like, because again, is punishing 350 million people that way the right thing to do, and listen, there's this, we talk about this all the time. Presidents who come into office, no matter how slim their election vote was, or claim this kind of mandate, and the people demanded that I am empowered. They want this. I think that Trump is going to learn really fast that not everybody who voted for him voted for everything he's trying to do.
No, right? Especially not when egg prices are still as high as they are.
Right. I mean, when people voted and they said, we want inflation to be, we want these prices to come down. We don't want to, and you're out here doing things that either aren't related to that or worse yet, are going to exacerbate that. I think in 2 years, there could be an election that is very rough on Trump and the Republicans.
Yeah, the midterms will be wild.
If prices haven't come down some, at least relative, and if some of these other things aren't resolved in a way that people are comfortable with, I just think he's going to learn, just like all of his predecessors learned in midterm elections, that voters didn't vote for you to go off on some kind of radical, aggressive path. They voted because the very narrow slice of them, or all of them, had a very narrow slice of what you were offering that they felt this is worth changing, making the change. And if you're not going to focus on that narrow slice where there's broad agreement, you're going to be in a hard spot.
Yeah. I can guarantee you there are some very upset New Yorkers this morning who voted for Trump and do not like the fact that he has dismissed the charges against Mayor Eric Adams.
Right. So
this stuff is getting wild.
That was really surprising. He pardoned Blagojevich from Illinois. Yeah, right. So, okay, let me ask you about this. A lot of this is driven by DOGE. What is because DOGE is not an official government agency, right? I haven't seen anything. We haven't seen him propose this to Congress or say, I'm creating this new office out of the Treasury Department or whatever. This is just kind of like this ad hoc group of people headed by Elon Musk.
Boys, it's not even people. It's young men.
20-something men, right? Who have been given unprecedented access to information across the federal government, who have no experience in public policy whatsoever, who have no experience in just working for the government, and who yet we are entrusting to be able to identify.
I don't know who's entrusting.
Waste, fraud, and abuse. And there has always been this perception that there's this massive waste, fraud, and abuse. And as you said, listen.
There's always bloat.
There's always bloat. That's going to be there. But I don't think it's anywhere near at the level that people are thinking. No. And I'll give you just one example of that. I heard somebody or saw on social media, and it's harder and harder to do that.
I know. I like it when you get angry on social media. It's my favorite.
Someone on social media was like, they've uncovered that over the last 20 years, there was $200 billion in waste, fraud, and abuse. And I'm like, well, that sounds like a big number, but how much money has the federal government spent in the last 20 years, right? $100 trillion, $50 trillion, whatever it is, it far exceeds 200 billion, right? 200 billion is like 1% maybe of how much the total spending over that time. If you were to say, let's just say that total spending has been 100 billion or 200 or 20 trillion, that's the number, 20 trillion, and you found 200 billion over that same, you're really talking about 1%. I don't know any entity, private, government, that if you told them, look, we can limit your waste, fraud, and abuse to 1% of your, they wouldn't say, that sounds like a really good deal. Right? I think we've minimized to the extent possible that. Yeah, we don't like having any of that, but are you ever going to get rid of all of it? And if I'm just dealing with 1% of my budget, is that really for me to be concerned about?
No.
So I'm just, there's this mythology that has emerged among some that there's this massive waste, fraud, and abuse. And if we just got rid of it, everything would be fine.
Which is nonsense,
And I'm going to tell you, there's not enough there to make much of a dent.
Well, no, and especially the programs that we're shutting down and justifying, like USAID, for example, right? We have depended on a lot of these international organizations and programs that we've created since, the end of World War II for soft power, right? It's not about military and hard power at this point in the world. We have globalized. We have intermingled our market economy. At this point, there is no one tethering that as protectionist as you want to be. And so it is mind-boggling. It's absolutely mind-boggling to think that we're just going to just untether ourselves from one another.
And as you know, I mean, there's also this mythology that there's this huge amount of the federal budget going to foreign aid.
Right.
And it typically is like 1% of the total spending. Right?
0.1%.
You can eliminate it and it would make no difference in the deficit.
But it would. In the budget, but it does
it
to
would
the
impact
power,
our
image.
ability to influence what other countries are doing.
It already is.
And again, we're not saying we can't have a discussion about, is that being spent effectively? Are there programs that maybe we need to restructure? We're not saying any of that. That should always be under consideration, right? But what we're saying is building up this idea that there's this massive amount of American taxpayer dollars that are going to other countries. Number one, is not true. And there is some benefit to us engaging in that way with these countries, right? I mean, there's a reason China has been spending millions of dollars on the Silk Road, right?
The Belt and Road Initiative.
The Belt and Road Initiative, right? Silk Road.
That's okay.
The Belt and Road Initiative, right? There's a reason they've been trying to do that and gain influence with us. Now, there are problems with that as well, but the problem is we can't withdraw to Fortress America and think that we're going to be okay.
At all.
And we certainly can't do that and think all of our partners out there, they should just be left to fend for themselves, that they're going to be okay, right? There are, you've got China, you've got Russia, you have Iran, some others that they don't have good intentions towards their neighbors. And they would absolutely like to eliminate our influence abroad, or at least reduce it to the extent that they can maneuver more freely. And them maneuvering more freely is not in our best interest.
No, absolutely not. Like I said, that soft power has been developed and crafted for 70 years. And we are allowing it to just be, they chiseled the name off of the building USA the day after. It's really shocking to see us just completely push ourselves away from the table. And as you said, somebody else is going to fill that vacuum. And BRICS is doing a hell of a job right now of really trying to get in where they fit in on the international level. Whenever the U.S. abdicates, somebody is going to fill that void at this point. We're not.
And that somebody is not likely to be somebody we want there.
No,
right?
even if it's an ally, we still want to be in control of the conversation, and we're not at this point.
Right. We've got a couple of things going on, right? So we have countries like Russia and China feeling like, hey, we're going to have the ability to exert more both soft power, in some cases hard power in our parts of the world. But you have our allies really concerned that we won't have their back.
Absolutely.
If that is to occur, right? And
will we?
I don't know. I think people forget how integral, how central to the international order the United States has been since World War II.
Absolutely.
Right? It has been a world order that we have largely created through developing relationships with these other countries and pushing them to work together more, right? And that, as I said, that has largely benefited us. And just walking away from that, I think without much of a conversation, it's just like, we're just going to stop doing this, I think is really, really problematic.
Well, it's dangerous. it's kind of highlighted, I think, by your new Secretary of Defense's comments yesterday, basically conceding Ukraine before there's even been a negotiation.
Yes.
We're not going to give, there's no way they're going to get their 2014 boundaries back. It's just, I don't know at this point what we're willing to fight for.
Yeah. And particularly with Russia, I do not understand this on the right, this all of a sudden this affection for Russia, and this notion that Putin is kind of the good guy in this situation. I don't understand where that has come from.
What would Reagan do? Is what what would Reagan do?
I try not to live in the past, but I sit here and I'm like, Reagan was the guy who called these folks the evil empire, right? Yeah. Who walked away from Gorbachev and Reykjavik at those negotiations because he wouldn't negotiate in a way that Reagan felt was appropriate, right? Yeah. And so it's like, and now all of a sudden, Putin, who is, do I need to remind people, he's a former KGB officer who wants to restore to some extent the glory of the Soviet Union, whatever he thinks that is. And we're sitting here and we've got people like, that doesn't impact us, whatever,
no. In fact, your, what's her face? Intelligence, right? Apparatus, Tulsi Gabbard is great friends with Putin's Russia.
And this is what concerns me is this affection that Trump has expressed in a variety of ways for basically dictators, right? Putin, Orban, even
Modi,
the North Korean guy too, right? All of these people, he has expressed that, boy, they know how to get things done, or boy, they know how to take care of, get their people in line. And I sure wish, and it's like, that's not what we want an American president glorifying, So, yes, there's a lot of concern, and there's a lot of concern of the amount of activity that's happening, which has just, I think Trump's activity has been greater than anybody really anticipated it being, because it seems like nobody was prepared. And like I said, every day something's coming out and it's keeping people on their heels. Yeah. What do we focus on? What do we talk about? Where do we, go? And so I think this aggression right out of the race has put a lot of people on the defensive and made people confused about, well, how do we deal with this? There's just so much that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's pure chaos, right? If you throw so much at people every day, they're unlikely to catch all of the nonsense. Yeah. And a lot of that is going to filter through. And as we kind of started this conversation with, that's thankfully why we have the judicial system to try to weed out some of this nonsense.
Right. And to say we have a process for doing things. Yeah. You have to follow the process, right? And listen, I get it. The process can be frustrating. It can be
bureaucracy sucks.
Painfully slow. It cannot produce results that the pure results that you want, because you have to negotiate and compromise.
Well, and you can't just have some lapdog running the government who wasn't elected. I mean, you're going to have to follow norms.
We're back to DOGE. That's my big concern is these are not people who can be held accountable to anybody, really, right? Trump says he's going to, but Trump he seems to be fine with let them do whatever they're going to do. And
the Prime Minister of India met Elon Musk's kids yesterday at the White House.
Yeah.
I don't
get
that part.
Yeah. So lots of concerns there.
We love communication that goes both ways, not just you listening to us pontificate. We would love to hear from our audience. If you have comments, suggestions, or would like to contact us about possibly being a guest on the show, please email notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu.
Let's shift to state and local stuff. I have been really interested in this what has been brewing of this kind of rift between Governor Stitt and Ryan Walters that really became public this last week, where
the girls are fighting.
Stitt replaces 3 members on the State Board of Education. And in his announcement that he's doing this, talks about how the State Department of Education has become just a place for political. What was the phrase he used? Controversy or something like that.
Nonsense, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that. But and he wanted him to be focused on education and the children and this kind of stuff. Ryan Walters immediately responds and says, which I thought was hilarious, that Stitt is now part of the swamp that Trump is trying to fight against, you know.
So good.
And it's like...
So good.
Only someone... okay. Only someone from Ryan Walters' perspective could come out with that with a straight face, right?
Well...
And then Stitt makes some other comments yesterday, and Walters announces he's forming a DOGE-style committee focused on education, and he's putting 2 of the 3 dismissed board members onto that with himself, which I'm like...
Because that's not a redundancy or inefficiency. Or
and what is this? Is this just a private entity that's going to be making recommendations? So Ryan Walters is basically going to be making recommendations to him. I think that's what's been happening already.
Yeah.
I don't think you need another committee to make that happen.
Are they doing this out of the goodness of their heart pro bono, I hope?
I don't know, right? There's all sorts of questions. It'll be interesting to see if Governor Stitt's appointees actually do attempt to rein in some of what's been going on there. I don't know. And then all of a sudden, Gentner Drummond, Attorney General, decides to weigh in on this and basically takes a swipe at both of them, right? So he sends a letter to these newly appointed Board of Education members saying, look, you need to be independent of the governor and Ryan Walters, and both of them suck, and they both have run things, and you gotta do your own thing. And it's like, I don't know that helps. I don't know that it helps his gubernatorial options, you know. But again, I don't know where Ryan Walters is at with the public. We need to get a pollster on the show at some point in time and just talk about what are the numbers.
That would be great.
I have to assume some people have been doing polling on the gubernatorial election.
I agree.
And where some folks are. Yeah. So it'd be nice to see what that. We need to talk. We know some folks. I think we could get on here and see where they're at. But I just, you know, if this is all very interesting, fascinating to me. You've got this basically rift amongst friends kind of a thing, right? That is happening. And then Walter or Drummond is trying to insert himself. So I'm really interested in watching that play out and see what happens there. Walters will be, if the majority of the board does start bucking against him, it's no doubt he's going to publicly chastise them, right? I mean, there's no hesitancy to do that. You mentioned a new mayor in Norman. Yeah. So tell me about that. I don't follow Norman politics that closely. I did see that they had some elections and some new people elected, but I don't know much about them.
Yeah, just a really interesting race. So you had the incumbent mayor, Hylika. I can't ever say his name correctly. He was ousted pretty handily. I think a lot of us believed that it was going to go to a runoff. So Non-Doc and Trace, as well as News 9, hosted a debate a couple of weeks ago. But a 17-year city council member, Stephen Holman, actually ended up winning, which was, again, really
without
interesting.
having to go to a runoff.
No,
is that right?
11,000 some odd to 6,000 some odd. Yeah, it was handy, a handily one. I'm sorry. So I think a lot of folks were really surprised by that. The incumbent mayor was or is more conservative. He kind of rode the wave of Donald Trump, et cetera. Okay. Obviously not openly, but it was clearly known. And Holman is more of an independent and has expressed a lot more concern, I think, with resolving the unhoused issue in Norman. And I think that was maybe what kind of pushed him over overwhelmingly. But yeah, really interesting local politics.
And local politics are so different from, state and national politics. In you really have people who have more direct administrative responsibilities in the sense of, these are the folks that make sure that your garbage gets picked up on time. Exactly. You don't have brown sludge coming out of your faucet when you turn on the water. That the police and fire are adequate for your community. A lot of things that we just take for granted in our daily lives that folks at that level can dramatically impact, either for positive or negative, right? And so we don't give enough attention, I think, anybody give enough attention to what happens at local government. And it is, again, the government that when it doesn't operate right, we feel it really quickly, right? Yeah. Let's see. I think there was one other thing before we get out of here I wanted to mention, and I'm trying. Legislation. So we've seen some legislation that we've been following, or at least I have been following, on the cell phones in schools. Yes. So the state house actually passed a version of that yesterday on the floor. We had a discussion with Senator Pugh, who chairs the Education Committee. Yeah. It has recommended it for approval, so it'll be on the Senate floor probably the next week or so, and then they'll have to compromise, between the two bills. So that's going to be interesting. I just think that whole discussion of how do we deal with this technology, how do we deal with the distraction, and we heard from educators yesterday, a couple of educators who said that when in their discussion with teachers, that the cell phones are one of, if not the primary source of distraction in the classroom. Right? I
imagine, yeah.
And so, we had a really good conversation about, can the state effectively ban that? How would that work? What are school districts trying to do? All of that. So that's been a really interesting conversation. I'm going to be interested in following that more as we get close to it. We're going to have other legislation coming down the pike too. Anything that you've been following that you can think of that?
Not really at this point. My students are in the state and local classes are just kind of getting started with their legislative projects. So I've not really been too much on the legislation lately, just the relationships and the inner workings. I think just kind of piggybacking on your Walters Stitt conversation, Stitt is also kind of having the same problems with his Republicans in the legislature right now. I don't think that he's going to get the income tax numbers that he wants or any income tax cuts.
I think it's going to be tough.
He's kind of having a little bit of deja vu. It's a little less contentious probably than dealing with Greg Treat, but still probably frustrating, I would think.
I'm sure it is. He's been wanting that for a long time, hasn't been able to get it. Everybody knows I'm not a big tax guy. I'm just not convinced that this cut 5%, I don't know that's what I would rather have a big summit and talk about total tax reform in the state and what might work rather than this kind of incremental stuff. Yeah. But that's a conversation for another day. We're running up against the clock. Sorry. Anything else before we get out of here that you want to mention?
No, I think I'm good for today.
This has been good. This has kind of been I wouldn't call it like a venting session, but there's just a lot of stuff we haven't had the chance to sit and visit about that's been going on. And I think it's going to continue that way for a while. I don't see the Trump administration slowing down. The legislature here in Oklahoma is in session, so that's going to be moving stuff forward. Lots to talk about. We appreciate you guys listening and want to remind you that
democracy is not a spectator sport.
We'll see you next time.
Hey everyone, this is Deborah, the resident Gen Z member of the Not My Generation podcast family. Not My Generation is produced in the Possibilities Inc. studio. This episode was produced by Lauren Peaches Keller. It was edited by Santiago Ramones. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Send a voice memo to notmygeneration@raider.rose.edu and you could hear your voice on an upcoming episode. If you liked today's episode, please consider giving us a 5-star rating and sharing the podcast with others. You can check out previous episodes on any podcast app and on our podcast website at notmygeneration.captivate.fm, where we also provide our show notes. And remember, you can follow Not My Generation on X, formerly known as Twitter, at NMG Podcast, and on Facebook at Not My Generation Podcast. We look forward to interacting with you soon.